Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. Now today we talk to Greg about his credentials. Who is he? And what experiences can he draw on to debate issues such as politics and international affairs? We ask Greg a little about his background and also how he has come to the views that he has of the world in which we live today. Now, admittedly, perhaps this should have been one of our earlier videos, but the coronavirus or COVID-19 has seemed to have taken precedence, and so we thought it fit and proper to have that discussion now. So let's go over to my asking Greg, who is he and what's he really all about? Welcome to Richard and Greg. It's Monday, the 3rd of August, 2020 at 9:30 in the morning. And we thought it appropriate to find a little about this person whose advice and commentary we've been asking for over the last 6 months or so. We call him controversially Greg, and we have him on the line right now. Greg, good morning.
Good morning.
So, just for the benefit of our listeners, I'm sure in the back of their minds they're thinking, well, who is this guy? How has he got any right to comment on politics and international affairs and to a limited extent finance and business and so forth? Greg, how old are you? Where were you born? And give us just a little bit of a potted history of your upbringing.
Firstly, a quick caveat on the word advice. I do not presume to give anyone advice because the word advice carries with it legal responsibilities, and I'm not qualified to give advice in any of those fields. I can give you my opinion, I can give you suggestion, and I can give you an indication of what I would do under the circumstances. But advice as a word can land you in a lot of trouble. I say this as a caveat that I'm not giving advice, and also to you not to imply you're ever giving advice unless you're legally qualified to. To move on, I'm 74 years of age, born in 1946, January. My father was a fighter pilot, Spitfires during the war. Fairly highly decorated. My mother was WRAF. My father stayed on to do a lot of the photography over Europe after the war of damage to airfields, etc., and damage to infrastructure, and then left the Air Force. We were going to stay in this country, but everything was very bleak, very grey, very tedious, very rationed, and very hard to get worthwhile jobs. So my father looked at being the pilot for the ambulance service in the Falkland Islands, it being a number of islands, decided that that was not a good idea, in that he would probably wind up being killed by the weather. And he then got a job working for BOAC, which was the national carrier, and was always believed to stand for better on a camel. And we moved to India, to Karachi. And bear in mind that at that date, Karachi was in India. He was involved with BOAC, Caterpillar and Air India. We had a very nice house in central Karachi alongside the Gymkhana Club. One of my very early memories was out on the Mayadan, which is the roadway running alongside the sea, of the racing camels pulling huge drays and racing because the drivers used to gamble with each other as to who could cover the distance fastest. We then faced partition when India and Pakistan were separated. let us bear in mind this was not two nations separating. This was the unmitigated racism that was prevalent in the Indian subcontinent between followers of Islam and followers of other religions and superstitions. Many people were killed in that partition from both sides as Muslims were relocated from what was to become India to Pakistan, and a number of other religions, Hindi, Christian, Sikh, and Buddhists, relocated from Pakistan to the Indian area. We had our house confiscated by the Liquid Ali Khan because he wanted it to live in, and we were given 8 hours to leave the country. My first understanding of race was at bayonet point as about 3.5 years old, being marched down the corridor in front of 2 of the Liquid Ali Khan's bodyguard. It would have been so much easier to pick me up and carry me. Anyway, we left there. We went to Switzerland for a short period, and then we went back to Bahrain, where I had the good fortune to be the first white child to live in Bahrain. We lived there for a few years, and then via Switzerland again, we came back to the United Kingdom, and I started to go to school in England. My father rejoined the Air Force for the stability, and I progressed through school. I went at one stage because my father was stationed in Cambridgeshire. I went to King's, Cambridge. After that, I went to school in Bristol and had the good fortune of a very good education, though I did not excel in any way. I just had too many interests, and very few of them were strictly academic. I then was living in Germany and entered the British Army and went to the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. Served for a while with the Green Jackets, then Sandhurst after a brief posting at Beaconsfield. But I bought myself out of the army, much to the army's chagrin, because I was really quite good at it, they felt, and so it would appear from the number of very senior boards I had to appear before I could get out. I left for 2 reasons. The regiment I was planning on joining was on standby to go into Rhodesia, and I'm afraid there was absolutely no ways on God's little earth, just to keep politicians happy, that I was going to oppose expat British in favour of a terrorist organisation and the likes of Robert Mugabe. The second reason was, although the British government had decided by democratic process that we would not enter into the war in Vietnam, possibly because we had been involved without the help of any other country in just the same war against exactly the same enemy in Malaysia and Singapore, where we had, by dint of using rather more subtle tactics than those used in Vietnam, we had managed to defeat the communist insurgents, and we'd left having granted Singapore and Malaysia Merdeka, which was their independence ceremony in, as I recall, 1957. So I well remember that. But reverting to our decision not to be involved in Vietnam, it became apparent, if one had the connections, that one realized that a certain sector of our forces were against the stated wishes of politicians, and without, shall we say, Queen and country backing them in Vietnam, but as consultants and active militarily, but wearing Australian uniforms. I felt this was morally wrong, and it was very similar to using British forces as mercenaries in the support of, as far as I can work out, De Beers in Sierra Leone, when we had absolutely no business to be there, or in our position supporting the liar Tony Blair and his crooked aims in Iraq, where the pretense was that it was due to oil, when anyone with any contacts in the area would be well aware it had nothing to do with oil, because we're never going to run out of oil. It is available, readily available virtually all over the planet, if you drill the hole to the right depth, where the oil fields off Gull Island, off of Alaska, exceed those of Saudi Arabia at its peak. And the war in Iraq was based purely and simply on maintaining the supremacy of the US dollar as a reserve currency of choice.
Okay, Greg, so you left the British Army. So what happened to you then? You went into commerce, I take it.
Well, yes, for a period I went into commerce and had a great time, and was based back in Bristol for a while. But then I was working for a company in London, importing and wholesaling in the giftware trade, also in the field of electrical insulation, because both were ceramic businesses. Whether one is making a flower pot or making a large insulator for a pylon, it's basically the same commodities involved. I then quit that because my parents had started an adventure training school in the Northwest Highlands of Scotland, and I went and worked there for a year. I then came back down to London, started my own business, having had a great deal of fun teaching kids to climb, rock climbing, wilderness training, etc., etc. Got back to London, cast about for something to do, and started a business of my own. I built that up very successfully, but then I realized that it really didn't seem to matter how much income tax I paid, because I managed to make myself a lot of money doing what I was doing. They perpetually kept on laying better and better sized assessments on me for income tax.
Was this in the 70s when you had the Labour government taxing people up to
the very end of the 60s?
End of the 60s, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, eventually I cut a deal with the tax man on the basis that if he thought I was going to pay any more tax than I'd already paid, he could whistle. And they threatened me with, but I'd end up in prison. I said, okay, send me to bloody prison. I'm not paying another red cent. And so it was agreed that as long as I left the country, they would overlook this. I set up another business in Italy, traded that for a while, again profitably, and then decided to leave Europe for a period. I thought at the time, and this is a caveat to you all, don't ever follow me. I thought that it would be really nice, because I'd been flown down to Beirut several times to go to parties or for long weekends, because I have friends with their own planes. I thought, yeah, it's a really nice place to live. You can go water skiing on Saturday, and then nightclubs, and it's very cosmopolitan and laid back on a Saturday evening, and then get up on a leisurely basis the following day and go up into the hills skiing, which seemed like quite a good lifestyle, and I could have hung a business around that would suit me, and decided, no, I wouldn't do that. And then I went and spent some time in Corfu, and I'd been in Italy and had a good time there. Anyway, I headed back to the airport and I said, where have you got plane going to? And I ended up flying to South Africa, where I very rapidly started work for an old friend who was starting a business there. It did very well, but he and I disagreed. I thought that he was spending too much money on the wrong things within the business, and we parted company. I might add that proof was in the outcome. He went bust for about 2.5 million rand, which at the time would have been just over £1 million, less than a year after I left him, because he wouldn't be prepared to follow, I'll use that word, advice. Anyway, I then decided that since I was now broke because I hadn't got a job and I'd spent a few months just enjoying the weather and traveling around in South Africa, I was reading the Sunday newspapers, and it said the highest paid personnel in South Africa at the time were business machinery sales. And so I interviewed a number of companies and decided which one best suited my requirements. I actually informed their marketing director. I phoned him up and asked, could I come and interview him again? And when I got there, we ended up with the MD of the company. And he said, what is your position about, because I'd said that I was writing an article about business machinery companies. And I said, well, really, it was a bit of a ruse, that I wanted to be able to look at every single one of the companies that were potential. And I have decided that yours is the one I would like working for me most. And he said, how do you mean working for you? And I said, well, I sell things. I'm quite happy to sell them for you because you look as if you can supply the goods in accord with the requirements of customers. And I said, I don't want a salary. All I want is a commission rate. And we negotiated over this. He said, that's not how we work. And I said, that's all right. I said, but you've got to admit it's quite a good way of doing it. You know, I've proved that I can get in front of anybody I want to in your organization. I can do it working for you. And we both benefit from that. Anyway, I did just that in the end, did very well at it, ended up as responsible for the whole of Natal with additional major national accounts, did that for a while. Then they defaulted on their undertaking on commission because I had sold an order that was about the same as their complete annual turnover to one customer, and they weren't prepared to pay the full commission that they had agreed, which I thought was a bit niggardly of them. So we parted company, I with a fairly substantial handout. And I then obtained a farm and started something completely different. I thought a bit of farming and landscape gardening, which I did. I also had certain other aspects that were as a result of my earlier military training, and I traveled fairly extensively in Africa, but let's not go down that road because there are security matters involved there.
And that is where we shall leave it for now. So this is the end of part 1. In part 2, we shall find out what Greg did after South Africa, how he came back to the United Kingdom, and what he's been up to since. We shall publish part 2 on Thursday or Friday. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel and press the bell sign so that you're notified of our videos as and when they are published. We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.